sense to you?
So what's the difference between an acupoint and a pressure point?
What I think is that an acupoint, they're the same point, but the acupoint is used to heal and the pressure point is used to damage.
Yeah, so as guesses go, that's a bad guess. Um, so it really depends on who's using the terms. Quite often, a martial artist will use the terms interchangeably,
That's what I
and quite often a healer. So let's say somebody does jiu-jitsu or maybe Reiki or certainly acupuncture, might not use them interchangeably, but store them all in the same bucket. But if we think of a place in the body that is susceptible to twist or strain, so it could be a nerve bundle, it could be a knot in the muscle, if you will, it could be a tendon that's rolled over the end of the bone, something like that. So an unhealthy expression of the tissues, maybe we could say it that way. That might be what we call a pressure point. In other words, if I'm massaging three people and two of them are 100% healthy, just like a thought problem, they're not going to feel anything when I'm there. But the third person who works 14 hours a day at a poorly ergonomically designed desk, staring at a computer screen, the moment I touch it, they light up and jump. So that's a pressure point. So is the pressure point extant in everybody? No. The pressure point is really my term, not mine, but the term of the healer to describe, that is reactive, right? Because it's bruised, because it's twisted, because it's strained, because it's exhausted, perhaps because there's a tumor or something, I don't know. But it usually means I'm looking for this to see if there's something that can be released, something that can be soothed, something that can be strengthened and lengthened and increased circulation. Whereas an acupoint is something that would be extant on everybody. And in particular cases, some people will jump when you press it, right? Like, gallbladder 30 or something. And other people don't particularly notice it. And whether or not they notice it, it's still there. So for the acupuncturist, for example, they might prefer you don't notice it, so you don't jump with the needle, but like they find the place, generally through sort of bodily topographic means, but certainly just a sense of anatomy. And they find the point, and if it's acupressure or if it's acupuncture, they apply insert the needle, apply the thumb or the tool. So that's kind of a basic understanding of that. When we talk about, striking points, or um, uh, using points in a self-defense context, often people will say pressure point, and they don't mean it the way the healer means it. They just mean, I don't really like pronouncing these Chinese and Korean terms or these Japanese terms, and I'm not sure about them. And plus, I can't remember them. So they just say pressure point because that's a very colloquial way to express, yeah, it's a thing that we press and you feel pressure and I press it when I'm under pressure. It's fine. So they don't use the term the way that the healer might use it. Of course, they might. You have martial artists who are healers, and so they do understand these things. But generally, when you hear a martial artist who's just got their, hand wraps on and their Muay Thai shorts and they say pressure point, I'm not going to assume that they know what a tsun is or anything about TCM. They're just saying, well, this is a tender point on most people, and I'm going to hit it.
Yeah,
Right.
that's That's my
Right.
ability.
Right.
What I know.
So you can imagine that if I was putting together a model, like a model airplane or something, like so fairly specific and dexterity dependent kind of job, small stuff, right? Fine motor control. I'm not going to do it when I'm a little drunk. I'm not going to do it when I'm a little tired. I'm not going to do it without my glasses. I'm not going to do it during a hurricane. I'm not going to do it in the back of the van when you're driving. I'm going to sit at my kitchen table, soberly sipping my tea, playing light jazz, with no kids and dogs running around, and I'll do the model. I can access my fine motor control, the specificity, the accuracy, the dexterity, the precision. If any of those other things happen, like the 4 dogs come running in, or the house starts to shake, maybe even a windstorm or something, or a lot of noise from the neighbor, maybe, I might just stop. Like, okay, that's all I'm doing tonight. In other words, my physical fine motor control, dexterity, aptitude at precision is a constant in this evening, right? Over time, it's not a constant, but in this evening, it's a constant. And yet I don't have full access to it during the windstorm with my 2 kids downstairs fighting, with the dogs running under my feet, with the table being rickety, right? So I have an objective, unchanging skill set, but I can't access it because the external conditions. Fair? Okay. So it's as if I functionally have fatter fingers and arthritis and bad eyes when all the kids are in the house and the table's rickety and the windstorm is kicking up and the tornado warning sirens going and I'm drunk, right? I'm effectively a fat-fingered arthritic person with macular degeneration. Effectively, right? Once we clear up those extrinsic conditions, I return to my base state of fine motor control, which we assume is good enough to do a model because I'm bothering to try. So, if you have on boxing gloves and something gets in your eye, you take your boxing gloves off, or you walk up to your trainer and ask them to get it, because you have the dexterity to get something out of your eye. But with the boxing gloves, which is sort of a temporary, in this case, physical challenge to your dexterity, the boxing gloves essentially make you have less functional fine motor control and precision and accuracy. You don't, but you effectively do right now. Does that make sense, right? So if I was to say to you in clinic, right? So there's a little Buddha statue, there's a Chinese calligraphy scroll on the wall, there's a little flute music very slowly in the background, beautiful carpet, maybe some incense from this morning you smell, beautiful orchid, fresh linens on the thing, really well lit, giant projector, PowerPoint of the anatomy and the points and the locations. And I say to you, okay, I sit on the thing and I roll my arm up. I'm like, help me find the small intestine point. And the lights are like, you can find it. Like, you're in clinic, that's what you do. And so you've studied, you referenced a chart, you hear the teacher's feedback, a little bit lateral to that, see if you can feel for that depression. Great. So then you go away from that and say, I can find that point. And maybe you can, like you've studied it, and this one you could reliably find small intestine 11 or something, right? What if I put boxing gloves on you? And you're not in that clinic environment with the lights and the perfect height of the table and the Buddha statue and the music, right? What if I ask you to find it when you're on Fifth Avenue in rush hour trying to cross the crosswalk and there's 2 seconds left and you're getting bumped into by people? And the mounted patrol officer may or may not be calling to you. Are you going to find it? Less likely, right? And if you do find it, what's your confidence with finding it? Not as high. Like, certainly you might find it, but your odds of finding it and the time it takes you to find it, the likelihood of you finding it, and your confidence in finding it are all effectively lower. Right, they're all compromised. Now, we can't say to ourselves that Ed doesn't know where small intestine 11 is. We know. He tested, he passed the MCATs or whatever. Like, we proved it. He's got a certification. We did it in clinic all week. Like, so it's true that he knows and he has showed evidence that he can find it. And yet, in this case, he didn't. Because on Fifth Avenue, crossing the crosswalk, limited time, the mounted patrol officer, crowded, getting jostled by people, that's effectively boxing gloves when something's in your eye, right? So we're functionally changing your access to your aptitude. Yeah? Now remember I said that trying to find the acupoint on Fifth Avenue, the accuracy, so the likelihood you find it is somewhat diminished. I don't know what the odds are, but it's less. The time it takes you to find it will be longer, and your confidence in finding it is be longer, right? Now, thinking about those three problems, right, which I think are all going to show up and maybe greatly affect things, but certainly somewhat affect them. Now we think, never mind Fifth Avenue, if I pop quiz you about something, you're in a fight. What are the stakes in a fight? Your life. Always, necessarily, inviolably, your life. And perhaps not just your life. Whoever's involved, whoever's around, there's those stakes. So are we going to pit these three diminishments when the stakes are life? Right? No. No. Right. So the fantasy that, well, I do Muay Thai, I do boxing, I do Krav Maga, I've whatever, got a year of Greco-Roman wrestling in college, like I can sort of scrap. But I also studied these pressure points, acupoints, death touch places, whatever you want to call them. And those are going to reliably, functionally, and in time, with confidence, make a marked difference in the outcome is a fantasy. Might they in a circumstance? Yeah, they might. If I happen to know them and it's something to try, I mean, I don't mind knowing it and it's fine to try. But the amount of time that it's going to take you to learn something with accuracy and then be able to do it at the moment of inaccuracy, right? When you're basically fat fingered and arthritic and drunk, essentially, when you're compromised, right? Psychologically, hormonally, fine motor control wise. The idea that this is what's going to save you is a fantasy. And the amount of time that it would take you to develop that, notwithstanding the fact that whatever degree of competence that you have is going to be diminished in a real situation, right? Even like the pop quiz on Fifth Avenue, it's diminished there, right? But who cares? It's just a funny prank I played on you to ask you in that moment. The amount of time that it's going to take you to develop that competence, you should really just learn how to knee somebody in the groin better. You should really just learn how to disentangle from somebody's limbs and keep your guard up better. You should really just learn how to get out of a headlock better and how to get your gun out discreetly. And you should really just learn a whole bunch of other things first. People that insist on teaching pressure points tend to do it because it sets them apart and you tend to imbue them with that sort of white coat confidence. Well, everybody in here is just a bruiser and a sweater and a wrestler, but she talks about all these medical, magical things. So she must have, just like any doctor, like I just assume you're better than me and smarter than me in every way because you're a doctor, and you're not. you're better at this, and that's why I'm here. Great. But you're not better than me in all these ways. You're just a human being like me, you know. And I'm a plumber, and you call me as a doctor when your sink is leaking. But I'm not better than you in every way. I'm not better than you in any way at all. It's just in this particular way I'm better at you. That's why you're paying me. And same thing, when I have a chest cold, I go to you and you take care of me, and that's great. But we don't tend to think that we're relieved that the plumber comes and your toilet works, right? But we don't end up thinking that the plumber is a better human being than us in so many ways. But we will do that to a doctor. I don't know why. There's like this magical aura around the white coat, right? Which is unfortunate for the doctor, for the relationship, for the person, and for society, right? So somebody, again, I'm in this Krav Maga school with 30 people who punch and bruise and sweat and slam, and they can all sort of fight in some way, you know. But then she is the one that teaches us magical pressure points. That seems to me like she has access to a secret door and did 6 years of medical school and knows all this stuff and can magically touch you like Spock and knock you out. And maybe she could in the clinic when everything's perfect and you sit still and roll up your sleeve and inhale, and then she's going to press. And if try that when you're getting jumped, right? I say that facetiously. Don't try that when you're getting jumped. Try something that's much more likely to work and that you can access under duress, right? If the only thing available to you in a given situation is, I might as well try this pressure point, nothing else is work. Like, I mean, sure, try it. Like, you know, it's fine, right? But if you can call in an airstrike, right, you shouldn't really walk over to the machine gun nest and try and knife the guy. You really shouldn't. You know what I mean? If you can't call it an airstrike, and the only possibility is to try and sneak up on him and knife him, like, I mean, you got to give it a try. It's fine. So if I had to, I'll try this pressure point because I do know some. And I have seen them work when my student goes, here, oh man, that's amazing. How well do they work when they're resisting me, when they're challenging me, when it's unexpected, when they're clothed, when they're moving, right? Things are happening fast, things are moving. It's acupuncture, right? You would do much better in a real conflict in which the stakes are life with puncture. I found something stabby, I'm going to stab you in the vicinity of you. Not, I'm going to find where this carotid artery is just, you know, medial and anterior to the SCM, where its attachment point to the, you know, pectoralis minor. And no, I'm just stabbing at your neck. See what we get. My bet is any stabbiness in and around your neck is a plus for me and a negative for you, right? Not let me find gallbladder 3, right? Having said all that, I might as well aim in the direction of gallbladder 3 because that does cool stuff. And so if I happen to get the ding, 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 you know, the Powerball, like I'll take any add-on effects of having gotten it. Fine. Perfectly fine, right? Might as well aim for stomach 41. Might as well. But if I don't, I got you in the ankle. I got you in the instep, right? I rolled your malleolus. Hey, this is pretty cool, right? So the the my personal notes on this, which run to, I don't know, 300 pages, the title of my notes that are just my notes to me is called Self-Defense, Not Self-Pretense, right? The fantasy is powerful. And if we're hanging around having a beer or deciding which movie to watch, there's value. It's fun. If we're deciding what's going to increase my odds of living, it's dangerous to me. Pressure points are dangerous to me as a martial artist.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you brought it up just now. One of the things that got me thinking about this is you were showing us the arm, and you talked about just hit him in the neck or make a gross
Correct.
on the arm. Uh, that got me thinking, well, at least I'd like to know a little bit about what I might hit. And I got the one in the leg that was a gallbladder with a gallbladder with something where the chart.
Yeah, like 31.
That's one that is police use it. I mean, that's probably a good target to go for. And I got thinking, well, I'd like to hit that a little more, aim for that a little more precisely.
Sure.
It's a big one. So, yeah, you're answering a lot of my questions now, but the reasons I wanted to know more is because of what you said about just hit him in the neck. What's there? I mean, I've read about it and everything else, but I just like to understand them.
The density of vulnerabilities in the neck, right, is what's really cool. The density of vulnerabilities in the neck is what's really cool, right? The density of vulnerabilities in the lower leg is very low, right? So if I threw 100 darts at your lower leg, besides being annoying and painful, maybe one of them hits something vital, that's a real trauma problem, not just, all right, Band-Aids, Whereas if I hit 100 darts at your neck, probably 98 of them are really problematic. And 2 of them are like, well, let's just hit a bit of fatty tissue that like just annoying, a little bit of blood, hurts a little, right? So the density of highly vulnerable, I don't know if structures is the right word, so locales, right, in the neck is high. So it makes sense if I'm going to hit you in the neck, because very little will go wrong for me and very little will go right for you. Maybe I hit the magical point or two that super doesn't go well for you and makes me look super heroic because a touch and you fell. But for me to rely on that is ridiculous. It would be like relying on a starter's pistol to defend your home. Might help, but that's a stupid thing to rely on. Get a real pistol or a rifle or whatever.
No, I watched you when you did it to me at the column once. We were doing light sparring.
Sure.
One kick to the legs. We both collapsed.
Right.
I actually saw a little girl in my youth class.
Sure.
Just happened to hit that.
Right.
And he went right down. Now,
right.
So, but you're saying that it's you're going to kick the leg, just kick the leg in that area. You're not going to find that. You're not going to hit it in most cases.
Well, I'm not saying you're not going to. I'm just saying to accept and presume is dangerous. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
does it pay to know where those points are?
It does, sure, but when we think of what it pays to learn, what are we thinking about? Are we thinking about I can sell this, I can have an inflated sense of my abilities, or will it pay off in a fight, right?
Or investment,
Right. The particular one that we're thinking about in the leg that you'll see used by the military and police is a nerve situation. So it might be more reliably called a pressure point than an Accu point, right? So it's a cluster of nerves, right? So so it's fine to learn them. And again, that when you understand something like that, that's a higher density of problems for the person that receives the strike there, right, or the constriction there, or the pressure there, or whatever, and something like that where you have a nerve bundle, it's going to be a larger geographic zone, right? So again, when you have something in your eye and you have boxing gloves on, you got to get the gloves off or get help. But if you had some spit on your sweatshirt, whatever, or an itch, that's easier to deal with, right? It doesn't require quite that fine motor control. So something like that makes a little bit more sense, and that's why it's used, right? But the caution is subscribing to the fantasy, and that's something we need to be aware of as martial artists, because it's really easy for me to sell the fantasy, like, hey, I showed you in class and you and Colin fell down, and therefore it'll work all the time against everybody. Were you guys fighting me? Were you moving around, or were you standing there waiting for me to show you a thing, or were we moving slowly? You know what I mean? So those are the challenges.
I watch, it's interesting.
Right.
Because YouTube has got a lot of exposés.
Oh, yeah.
Pressure points and that. And so now I doubted whether
Sure.
they were exaggerated. They're not. Those exposés, a lot of them are right.
Right.
So you're saying it doesn't really pay me to spend time reading about them and studying about them?
No, I wouldn't say that. Because part of what we want to do, and this sort of goes to what we were saying in your last class, Gary, where we talked about the collapsing field and the decision and discernment and all that kind of stuff, is that partly what we want to recognize, why did you get into martial arts? And I bet if we have a short conversation, at some point you're going to mention movies. And same for you. And same for the guy coming into the next class, and the same for the next person, right? Or something that you read, or, right? So the value to us of inspiration, I think, is not to be forgotten, right? But the confusion of inspiration for functional application, in which I'm reliable or confidently reliable in the face of high stakes, such as death, is the problem that we face. So again, if we're sitting around having a beer, if we're just joshing with some friends, you should really study the martial arts. Eventually you learn to levitate. Obviously I'm kidding, but like that's a little inspiring. That's a little fun. And maybe you could take on 3 guys at once and you get to learn the sword and stuff, right? But like learning the sword is more fantasy than anything else now, these days, right? But it's not without value. A, it is cool. B, it could help in a fight. I mean, right? C, it's really helpful because it keeps me coming to class and doing all these other things and keeps me engaged and inspired. So learning about them, studying them, and being inspired, and they certainly could help, and they're not lies, but there's a bunch of misinformation too. It's a good place for it, right? Right? When we asked my teacher about pressure points, we were specific. I'm sure you've heard this before. We were specifically asking him about these 2 books, which is better. And he picked them up and he did this, and he put the small book down and he goes, this one. And we're like, oh, cool. We're going to buy that book and study it. And he's like, this you could really smash somebody with, this book. And that was his whole point, like a book on pressure points is probably far more reliable as a weapon without having gone through your brain, just into your hands, right? So don't devalue the inspiration of it, but I wouldn't be studying it thinking this is the magical key. It's not. Even though I say it's not the magical key, it could turn out like in a particular, knowing that point actually helped in this case, and when they get, that's fine, right?
So this is helping me understand. It does help me to learn about them, to round me off as a martial artist.
Yeah.
But just as part of making the whole martial artist rather than making me a better fighter. So,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, well,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I like it.
I wanted to learn about them too.
Yeah. Well, I would say that you have a fiduciary responsibility. I don't know if I'm using that term exactly right, to your students, because you have students. So your excitement and interest in pressure points, we'll call it, is very easy to rub off on other people. And if they come away without the self-defense, not self-pretense idea, then you perhaps um, uh, unintentionally pass on a valuation of them that you didn't intend to. So I think it's important to share them, but be clear about inspiration and be clear about reality, and also be clear about functionality in messy reality compared to in the clinic that's well lit with the Buddha statue, where we can prove that something's real and functions. But that's a little different than I got jumped and I have a down coat on and I'm trying to find liver 13.
That last statement was really important because one thing I was going to ask, what I have done in class.
Hey, Steve, just cutting into my own video here. So I thought another way to possibly express the same thing, but maybe a little bit more cleanly, maybe even a little bit more relatably, is the idea of the button in boxing. If the button indeed exists, and it is as reliable in all cases on all people at all times, we wouldn't teach a hook and a jab and a cross and everything else. We just teach boxers to do this, and then we teach them how to hit the button. But the fact is, we can't reliably presume we're going to be able to hit the button. And of course, there's other things that we can target, and there's ways to defend the button. But we don't just send the boxer in there and say, make sure you hit the button and enjoy the next 12 rounds. We say, throw a jab, a cross, a hook, a left, and an uppercut, and all the rest. And you're going to be throwing them quite often at the head, right? And if you get the button, that's great. It's like your game is over a little bit sooner than you might have expected. And every time you miss the button, you might be quite likely to hit the head, the neck, the face. So it's a pretty good hit. It's not bad. I'm doing some damage. I'm having an effect. But I'm not presuming that my primary effect is going to be hitting the magic button and having them drop like a sack of potatoes. So while the button may exist, it doesn't exist in a sense that is that reliable in all cases, at all times, for all people, in all situations. So instead, we have them go in there, hit the body, hit the head, hit the head, hit the head, hit the head. And maybe on occasion you do hit the button. Great, I'll take it. That's a win. That's an easy win. Like getting dealt a royal straight flush. But it's really helpful to learn how to play poker, not just hope that you get that thing. So keep hitting the head for the purposes of hitting the head, of which there are many. And if you happen to get the button, great. But even if you do, you're not going to be able to translate that to an easy thing to teach that arrives in the individual who has been taught by you in a reliable way that meets the demands of real combat. So thank you. Get into the gym.